Walking into class the first day, we all had different perspectives. I was thinking, oh no, another class with Bamberg. Maybe this time I should go in with a more open mindset. Nope, this class definitely connects to my last one with him. Do I still remember my worry? And why is that flower always on the PowerPoint?
Why did I wait till junior year to do this? I have to do experimental methods at the same time, and I hate math. Oh, there's a girl I know. Never mind, she's a PLA. Why are there so many PLAs?
Where am I going to sit? I usually go straight for the back row to avoid ever getting called on, but it's completely filled with PLAs. I guess the second row will do. Anything is better than the first row.
Just when we thought it couldn't get any more ambiguous, the video by Sir Ken Robinson, Changing Paradigms, was played.
The country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle?
He goes on to talk about the fact that not much has really changed about school as a whole since back in the 18th century, and how the educational system needs to go through some major changes. Robinson believes that rather than medicating children so they can pay attention in school, we should think outside the box by individualizing education and revamping schools so they're no longer factories that simply pump out students. This applies directly to LEAP Learning Goal number 1, which talks about employing the different ways of knowing the world, or, as Robinson might put it, becoming divergent thinkers.
What we thought was initially about challenging education turned into a conversation about divergent thinking, which ended up being the platform for this class.
The first reading we had assigned was Bachner's It's About Time, which talks about how in academic life now, there's a sharp contrast between the personal and academic self, something Bachner realizes after his father dies, and he starts to see how the work he did in the past of dealing with death was strictly academic, considering he never had that personal experience. In the text, Bachner navigates his own identity while writing his obituary on his father's death and reflecting on his life. The first quiz question was why narrative? Meaning why is this text presented in narrative form? Looking back at our own quiz answers, this is what we wrote on the first week of class.
By presenting his theory on why he believes the personal and academic aspects of life should be combined, he's supporting his own theory by writing it in a narrative style. Writing this way helps to make emotional connections with the reader, connections that would be lost if he chose to write it in a solely academic way.
Bachner chooses narrative for this specific article because he is using his own solution to the issue he addresses throughout the whole piece, making learning more accessible by providing the information in a way that readers or listeners can relate to and understand.
Bachner chooses narrative to lead by example and to bridge the gap between his academic world and personal world. Narrative is far more engaging than an academic paper because it engages all of the senses and allows the reader to personally connect themselves to another story, allowing for a medium where research can be easily accessed and comprehended by both academics and non-academics alike.
We soon realized that learning to be good ethnographers and completing this course successfully was similar to learning how to surf. This now begins the tale of our steps towards surfing the qualitative wave.
The first part of learning how to surf is testing out the gear and finding different types of surfboards that fit your needs. We started this when we first got our syllabi. This key document is the surf shop in our metaphor, giving us all the tools we need to succeed. Reading strategies show us how we should be looking at the articles and the connections we should be making to class and to our personal lives. We all start with a basic reading strategy or surfboard before moving up to reading strategy 9 as our surfing improves. Also in the shops are books of how-tos to enhance our skills, such as Bachner, Mishler, and Shank's articles. Videos show techniques that different surfers use to navigate through the class and push us towards our end goal. We see these through our in-class exercises and in our PLA groups. Here we also learn about what kind of observer we are based on Shank's different observer types. To test out our techniques, we observed our PLA Andy and how he sets up for our discussion sections. Here we learned to embrace our different techniques and that we're not just one kind of observer, but many. The abstractor, the interpreter, the photographer, and the baseliner. In the shop, we are not just picking gear. This is a process towards learning how to surf. Here we are practicing ethnography, not to become great observers, but instead to become better note-takers by learning to work with data and noticing the importance of qualitative research. Getting a leash for your board. There are 2 reasons for wearing a leash while surfing. First, to keep you and the board connected and on track. Second, making sure that neither one is lost out to sea without a safety net. PLA groups act as our first leash, pulling us back to the shore when we get lost and encouraging us to get back on the board and ride out the wave. Here we can use our strength as a group to push our peers forward. Our portfolios also keep us on track and connected to class. The squibs inside them help us to reflect back on past readings, while self-reflections and interim reports help us see our growth over time, as well as pointing out areas of improvement. These act as the main tool of organization for our course. We can also bring in Fish's ideas of interpretive communities here. Each person brings a different perspective to the group, and our mindsets are constantly changing as we become more attuned with our surroundings from our observations and interviews. Mishler also showed us how to properly conduct an active interview. All of these pushed us deeper into the water toward a more divergent mindsets and a better view of qualitative.
The next step in learning how to surf is practicing on the ground. This is done by attaching the leash to your leg, and while lying belly down on the board on the sand, you practice the paddling motion to get a sense of the feeling of the movement. The idea of practicing before with your surf teacher helping you through the motions is like the class activities throughout the year, where we got to practice the skills we would use for our ethnography and interview projects together before jumping in alone.
We first started with the Kyoto clips, looking at body positioning by focusing on things like the way someone's feet were pointing. We also looked at body posture and patterns of movement with people riding the escalator. This practice of looking at the body was background for our ethnography project, where we were trying to find patterns of movement in our locations, looking for things like people crossing their feet, the area where people stand in line, or even how often someone looks at their phone.
In another class activity, we listened and watched Betty telling the story of when she lost her dress. Here, in addition to the body, we started to look at narrative, moving from what Bamberg said in class as the feet of the Kyoto natives to the mouth. We looked at bodily cues such as lip biting, gaze aversion, and hand movements, something we've been doing since the first activity with the Kyoto natives in our ethnographies. However, we also looked at what was said in this interview, and particularly how a story can be told differently based on our thought processes, emotions, and timing in which the narrative is being told. The 2 times Betty tells her story give off different feelings, or as we talked about in class, 2 different identities of Betty.
In a third example, we looked at interview clips from Edison Chen and John Edwards of their public apologies. With these, we went over basic techniques for analyzing discourse, such as looking for overused words, change in intonation, pauses, stuttering, and mumbling. We then moved on to looking at the transcripts of these interviews and focusing in and identifying the 3 identity dilemmas: consistency versus change, sameness versus difference from others, and authority versus passivity. Looking specifically at the transcript of Edison Chen's apology, in lines 8 through 13, he uses the words you and your, creating a feeling of relativity between the audience listening and him, trying to present the idea of you would have done the same thing in my position. In this, he also denies agency, blaming what he did on the fact that he was deluded by fame. In lines 18 through 20, by saying that he does his laundry and takes out the trash, he's trying to present himself as being a normal, everyday person, instead of who he was before when he was caught up in his life as a celebrity. One of the key parts of the apology is in lines 38 through 40, when he comes out to say that he is different than the Edison he was before, and is now a new person. Through this, we can clearly see how there is an issue of consistency versus change of his identity presented.
The next step is standing up on the board, also called taking off on the wave. And going to stand can take a bit of resilience and requires some serious independent practice and time to get the movements down.
In our class, the process of standing up on the board is like doing out-of-class assignments, such as segmenting the JF story and transcribing and analyzing a short story from the in-class interview with Jonathan. To complete these, we had to take the skills we had learned in class and practice working with them on our own to help us prepare for the final project.
And now, preparing for the surf. Although you can learn a lot from diving into the deep end, it is often helpful to have an idea of what you're getting yourself into. Whether you're checking to see the swell for the day or getting prepared to observe a social setting, the best outcomes are from being both prepared and flexible. Checking the weather. According to Bassinger and Dadier, ethnography is a way of synthesizing and reporting empirical research. When we were observing social settings on Clark's campus, we were asked to complete a series of questions on our syllabus before visiting the field. These questions included things like, why are we choosing that particular field? To guessing what there might be to learn, or how we were to approach the task, and what it was exactly we were going to focus on. Although why, what, or how we planned to complete these observations may have been ambiguous or unspecified, there was a rough outline of our intentions, making the research both empirical and adaptable. Paddling out. Paddling out on your own, after you've selected your board, tied your leash, taken lessons, and checked the weather can be scary. But you have to trust the tools you've been given. Our two projects in this course, both our ethnography and our interview projects, provided us with the opportunity to work on our own and apply everything that we had learned in the classroom to real-life experience. Both while we observed in the field and during our interviews with former Clarkies, we assimilated new readings and adjusted our approaches both to the behaviors we looked at and the questions we asked. The more that we visited our field, the more comfortable we became, and the more we were willing to step outside of our comfort zone. The longer we interviewed, the more information we could pull from previous answers and delve into topics. By no means were we professionals at the end, but practice allowed us to better ourselves. Practicing on the sand or in the classroom is one thing, but being able to try out those instructions on the real thing and learn from experience is incomparable.
At this point, we have done all of the readings, taken all the quizzes, written all of the squibs, lived through all of the class activities, met with our PLA groups, observed in our fields, and even conducted our own interviews. So then, what is the big wave that we've been trying to learn how to surf this whole time? The answer is simple. The big wave represents the real-world experiences. Just as a wave builds, gains more water, height, and more momentum as it comes rushing towards the shore, this course has continued to build on itself, thanks to the scaffolding structure. In order to tame the wave and successfully ride it, we need all kinds of skills. Just as a beginning surfer begins practice on land and eventually moves to water, we as students learn in the classroom on a college campus before taking our skills to a job site or professional situation of the real world. This course has consisted of a mixture of theoretical as well as practical readings and training. The readings covered factual knowledge about terminology such as ethnography, observation, and interviewing, and introduced us to fundamental principles such as interpretation, discourse, and narratives. These terms and principles helped us gain knowledge as we worked towards qualitative skills that could be applied to the analysis of people, specifically looking at what people do. The practical training consists of the analytic microskills we learned inside the classroom through class activities and the hands-on projects that were conducted outside of class. These assignments allowed us to use our newly acquired skills and knowledge and apply it to true qualitative research. In order to link all components of the course productively with the theory of qualitative and interpretive inquiry, we had to constantly engage ourselves in the material and become active, independent learners. As we paddle out into the ocean, we will use all that we have learned from qualitative methods and successfully ride the massive qualitative wave of the real world all the way into the shore.
Perhaps the most important thing to take away from this class, however, is its real-life applications. And not all of us are surfers. Clark's LEAP initiative prides itself on taking the knowledge we've learned in the classroom and applying it to real-life experiences. LEAP Learning Goal 4 focuses the most on connecting the classroom to the world, and I think that I would say the same for Clark's entire LEAP initiative. Like, this is the way that we're verbalizing what we're doing in the classroom can be translated into real life, and that is incredibly important, and I think that that sticks with the theme of qualitative methods and trying to find the middle ground between what we want to learn and what we want to share with the world. I think that it supports Bachner's theory of trying to find something that bridges the gap, and I think that it reflects qualitative methods as a means of research because it's really tailored to humans. And it's, you know, it's not tailored to large populations, and yeah, it might not be as generalizable, but in the end, you know, it's about connection, it's about reflection, it's about making sure that what you're learning can be applied, and that you're applying it, and that you're coming up with new ideas from that, and that you're continuing to learn, and that that's not disrupted, and that that's everywhere in every world that you live in.
For my own personal LEAP learning goal, I chose learning goal number 4, which is the ability to integrate knowledge and skills. And one of the main reasons that I picked this is because this class is one of the first ones that I've had that started talking about making connections between not only what you're doing in the class, but also trying to use that and bring it into real life applications. In my other classes, I've kind of been looking at them as, you know, if there's chapter 1 of the textbook, there's chapter 2, 3, and those are all separate things that I'm only studying to maybe get a certain grade in the class, or just to do well on the test or the final paper. And then after that, I'm kind of just done with the class. But I'm also starting to think after this class that there's more to it, and that I can use this knowledge that I've gained from these classes to not only understand more of my other classes as well, like by making connections with other classes that I'm taking at the same time, but also use that and apply it in the future with maybe what I want to do with my career, or just in the future with goals that I have. That's been something that I've already found myself doing, especially, I mean, with the fish article in general. Like, after reading that, I kind of started to think about how I see things, and like, I mean, if I was in the library doing an observation project or doing my ethnography, and I would look at somebody and I would think that they're using their phone, but the only reason I know that is because of my background and the background that I have in knowing what that technology is. That kind of helped me understand more of the way that other people think, and how if they have a differing opinion, I mean, it's not just that they have a different opinion than me, it's really because they had a completely different background and life experience than I did. And I think that by being able to take what we've learned in this class and apply it into the future is something that's extremely helpful, especially if you're looking into like going into a career psychology like I am.
My personal LEAP learning goal was learning goal number 5, which talks about effectively practicing skills and sort of preparing you for a career and your life outside of Clark, which is exactly what I want out of an undergraduate degree, is to be able to gain the skills and knowledge that are going to make me competitive in the workplace. Sort of no matter where I end up in life, if I get my dream job or end up somewhere that I wasn't quite expecting, I'm going to need to be creative and resilient and persistent and work independently, but also be able to collaborate and work with other people. I think that throughout qualitative methods, sort of doing all of the readings, gaining a lot of knowledge independently by doing those readings by myself and writing my own squibs, but also having sort of the PLA group around, having the PLA himself to be able to sort of reference and talk about topics of the class, or prepare for projects or interviews or observations, that I have gained a lot of just sort of life skills that are really important, and I think that that's really what LEAP Learning Goal 5 encompasses, is applying all of those things that can't necessarily be taught to you, but you just sort of have to learn through experiences.
And mine was kind of an adaptation from Learning Goal 5. I wanted to use my group as more of a scaffold, but also use working in a group as a way to grow myself as a person. Throughout this course, I've realized that there are so many things that I don't know, that I thought that I knew before, and that my group members were able to say, like, you know, Gas, like, I think we should do it this way, we should do it that way. And it's really taken me a lot through this course to just, like, bite my tongue and be like, okay, well, like, I don't think that's what we should do, but it's fine, like, let's do it. And I think that has, like, been my biggest growth throughout this course, is being able to step away, accept that I don't know everything in qualitative, and that I never have known everything in qualitative. Just because I have watched these videos 3 times now, 4 times now, or because I've read these readings over and over, does not mean that there's everything I needed to know. And each squib that I read was, I learned new things. There are things that were pointed out in class that I had never thought about before or looked at before. And I think that's really because of working in a group and also learning from my classmates that aren't in my field.
If you were asked why narrative again, now that you've completed the Qualitative Methods course, what would your answer be now?
As to why narrative, I think that narratives are actually built from these social interactions, and through these interactions we're getting to learn not only more about others and how maybe they view themselves or form their identities, but also just more about ourselves. I think that by having narratives and telling stories and learning about people that way is way more personal than if you're trying to do research and ask somebody about something and asking them a question like a survey and having them respond on a scale of 1 to 5, where they're having to fit into that specific number. But when you're asking them to tell a narrative or to tell their story, they're able to become more personal about it, and you're actually able to learn more about how they feel maybe about a subject or something.
Beginning of this course, I really thought that narrative was just a way of telling your story, but I realized it could be any story that just shapes our identity and showcases who we are to another person. Usually this is done by the 3 identity dilemmas: agency and passivity, sameness, difference, and constancy and change. But it's also like the body language, like I talk with my hands, which shows you something about me, and like what's around me. So I'm at work right now before I go on to a shift, which I think probably tells you a lot about me, and I have Dunkin' Donuts, which is I'm addicted to, but I'm also choosing to tell you those things, and I think it's more important that I'm choosing to tell you those things and adding that as part of my story. I've also realized that, like, I need to be careful as to what I say personally and how I want myself to be perceived. I learned that especially through the apologies, and that there is sincerity when you apologize, but there is also not. And if in an apology you're constantly relating to someone else, you're not taking any agency for yourself, and you're not taking any credit for what you did. And I think that's a very powerful lesson that I've learned through qualitative.
I think that you can tell a lot about a person through the stories that they're willing to share and the way that they tell them. You can sort of pick out a lot of people's traits or their own morals or beliefs through the stories that they tell, what they choose to talk about, what details they're willing to share, or how detailed they're willing to talk about an experience. Through life narratives as a whole, stories about family or friends, or especially stories about sort of communities that you're involved in, whether those be religious or through some sort of a common interest, those definitely tell a lot about who you are as a person. I think that narratives are especially important when you're looking at major life events. So the death of a person, as Bachner talks about, or even something that is like very societally or like culturally associated, such as, you know, the most recent presidential election, or I'm from Boston, so I've talked a lot about people in regards to like the Boston bombing that happened a couple years ago. You know, people go through those same experiences. You know, other people, like as to Bachner, other people have lost their father, and you can sort of talk about that, but everyone's going to have a very different experience. Same with the election or the attacks in Boston. You can be there, you can live through those situations, but everybody's going to have a different perspective on the situation based on their own sort of communities of interpretation. And things like that can affect people in so many different ways, emotionally, physically, mentally. Hearing those kind of personal accounts can sort of reveal a lot about a person and how they make sense of adversity and change.
I truly think that narrative is the most useful and accessible means for communicating theory to the majority. Jean Marichek talks a lot about how we try to prove ourselves in social science, like by being really super scientific and focusing on the scientific method, that we forget that our place of work and like our career field is aimed at bettering the lives of human beings, and yet we get so caught up in this need to be valid that we make our work inaccessible to the people that it would benefit the most. And I really think that narrative could be that middle ground. I think that, you know, if we share our stories and we also present theories and capturing our audience and all of the emotions that they could feel, and I think that we're making it accessible. No one wants to sit and read an academic paper. It's pretty boring. Not even that, you know, not everyone has the cognitive capacity to even understand what they're reading, and I think that socialization has taught us to interpret everything through narrative and to express things through narrative, and it's just natural and it's effective and it's accessible to people.